All right, I'm back. I'm still in section 3, which is structures lessons. And I'm now at nonlinear structure, where I'm going to talk about the, speaking of courage, the story about Norman Bowker and Kiowa in the shit field in Vietnam. All right, so a nonlinear structure, O'Brien tells us exactly what it looks like. And this, again, is why it's so very helpful to use these stories. So let me get myself out of the way here. Oh, that's a bit big, eh? Let's make yourself a little smaller there. Okay, good. So I'm quoting from O'Brien here, and he says, to provide a dramatic frame, I collapsed events into a single time and place, a car circling a lake on a quiet afternoon in midsummer, using the lake as a nucleus around which the story would orbit, right? Which I quoted to you before this last little bit. And this is from his notes about the story itself, right? So it's a commentary by the author about the story. All right. And so when we talk about a car circling a lake and using the nucleus around which the story would orbit, O'Brien is suggesting a very useful image for us, and he's actually he's a very good writer with images. He's very good. I want to call him an imagist because that's a different thing, but he is very good with these metaphors. And so here is on the left. Okay, I've learned that this doesn't work. Probably it's to my right, so I'm guessing it's over here. But there's the blue picture of the solar system, which is actually what that is, with the sun at the center, right? And all the planets in orbit around the gravity of the sun. And then I've actually given you a picture of the lake itself, because the lake is a real lake. And you can see it has this particular arc where you can actually make an orbit around the lake. Okay. So what we can take away from that is, yeah, all right. So what we can take away from this is that there's a parallel here. Let me just get out of the way here. All right. There's a parallel here between these two stories. And again, just as there was in the Kurt Lemmon story, How to Tell a True War story, there is here two different stories going on, which O'Brien has told us, right? Very handy. One is about home and is about Norman Bowker as a young man or as a teen. And one is about going to war, and it's Norman Bowker and his relationships, specifically his relationship with Kiowa in Vietnam, who was his friend. At home, we have the lake. Well, what's the equivalent of the lake in Vietnam? Well, it's this shit field, right? So I've got a picture of men here who are walking along dikes. These are sort of famous on flooded paddies. Planting rice, as I mentioned, is an enormously hard job. And then once the rice has been planted, you flood the paddies and the rice begins to grow and so on. And so it's just an incredible environment. I mean, it's a brutal environment to grow anything in. Okay, and then we have my little Shutterstock image of a guy drowning here, and that's what happens to Norman's friend, right? Is that he drowns. And, well, what happens in the Vietnam story? Well, Kiowa drowns, right? Kiowa drowns in shit. And then at the end of the story in America, it's the 4th of July, a big celebration. And at the end of the story of the shit field is a bombardment on the shit field, which has turned into the soup because it's been raining. And the bombardment basically forces the men to get up. They realize that they're under fire. They have to get out of the field, and Kiowa drowns in this dreadful, horrific way. And even worse, well, I suppose it's not really worse, but in an equally bad way for the survivor, in this case, Norman Bowker, he is unable to save Kiowa, which will then haunt him for the rest of his life. So we can look at these and say, oh, there's a parallel between, and so the stories orbit, both stories orbit drownings, deaths, right? Deaths of people who are too young, who are innocent is the argument, who died before their time, as we would say. All right. If we want to represent it then, one of the ways we might represent it, since the story literally goes around in a circle, is this way, as a circle. So why not? Like if you're going to represent it, well, get it some paper and play with it. Let's see, how does it go? It's a nonlinear structure. Okay, so it starts at home, and there's a discussion of the lake, and then Max drowns. And we're like, oh, wait a second, this is not good. Because this is the story that happens at home. Wait till we get to the war. And then here comes the war, blam, right? So I put the war in this big, big dramatic box. And then we hear about the shit field. So we know it's not going to be good, right? I mean, it's already gotten worse. Then we're back at the lake. Like, oh yeah, we're starting to get it now. Yeah, okay. The shit field and the lake are the same thing. Norman is trying to deal with the story, and he keeps telling it to himself. And the more he tells it, the worse it gets. And he thinks about telling his father, and that doesn't make it better, despite the fact that his father is supportive and is trying to understand. And then he tells us the story of the mortars. Kiowa drowns. And then it's the 4th of July, because Norman really is living at the lake. And he's like, oh, but wait, I'm still here. And then he wades into the lake, and the story ends. What is it? And it was a pretty good show. I think that's what it is. I think that I'll just leave it like this. Let me paraphrase the story. It's like it's a pretty good show. So the nucleus that the story orbits, or these stories orbit around, is young death, and the inexplicability of it. And speaking of courage, like what is the definition of courage? What if Norman had just held on? Is he the one who failed here? Because he feels he failed. But that's not what the narrator feels, obviously. So this concept of a circular narrative, which is very common, is a very standard way of organizing more complex stories, you have to struggle with it, right? And we have to think of it. It's like, look at it at the model and say, what are we dealing with here? Is this a circular narrative? Do we come back around to the point of origin? We start here and we're going to come back here. Yeah, we are in this particular case. So if we look at O'Brien, because O'Brien keeps giving us the best information about how to read these stories, right? And he says on page 33, this is, I don't think I asked you to read this story, but this is, he says, the memory traffic feeds into a rotary up on your head, where it goes in circles for a while, and then pretty soon an imagination flows in, and the traffic merges and shoots off down 1,000 different streets. So here's again a very vivid image of the way that your memory traffic, as he calls it, is sort of going around and around like this big, it's like spinning. And it goes in circles for a while, and then it starts to spin off in all these different directions. And because imagination comes in and carries out the truth with it, or the actual events with it. So you think, well, it could have been this, or it could have been that. And so you begin to think about all these different ways that the story could be narrated. Now, this idea of a rotary is something which is particularly common to Britain, although they've appeared now in the last sort of 10 years. They've begun to appear in southwestern Ontario as traffic circles. But the traffic roundabout at Swindon is one of the earliest and one of the most famous. And you can see here that as you approach Swindon, if you're driving, if you have the bad luck to be driving and approaching Swindon, and you're trained to drive in North America, you will be driving, first of all, on the wrong side of the road as far as you're concerned. And you will see this monster, which is called the Magic Roundabout, coming. And the Magic Roundabout from the air looks like this, without any traffic in it, right? So people have been known to sort of have little nervous breakdowns when they drive into one of these things, because the way to use, basically you just keep going around until you get to the off street you want. But it's hard to remember which one did I want. if you want to get around to, if you come in at say 6 o'clock and you want to get off at 5 o'clock, you have to go all the way around. That's the point about these circles, right? So, and remember, for us, you'd be driving on the left. Pardon me. Jesus, now I'm so screwed up. Yeah, that's right. You'd be driving on the right side of the road. Oh, God. So the traffic lane plan, as you can see, I put that in as well, shows you basically where you have to give way. So the green lines you have to give way, and where the curbs are. This is the British spelling of curb, C-U-R-B for us. And so how do you get off? So you get on, and then you use these little roundabouts, these mini roundabouts within the roundabout, hence the magic roundabout. Well, what if your story looks like this? That's the idea, because maybe this is what memory is sort of like, that memory spins around and everything seems to orbit. Now, that's a very rational description or discussion of memory. My own experience is that memory is in no way so rational, but it's an interesting idea that there is this magic roundabout, magic rotary, that essentially is sort of always spinning, and here come your ideas, and they sort of get, and then they shoot off in directions which you can't see coming, basically. So it's an interesting idea, and I think it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.